Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca.
Welcome, friends. I am Cindy Thompson, and this is a Resilience Project. This is a space where stories are shared and possibilities are discovered. I invite you to partner with me in cultivating resilience among humans, one conversation at a time. Today, I am very honored to chat with Alvin Law. Born without arms, Alvin was one of many children born in the 1960s with deformities as a result of thalidomide. This was a medication that was prescribed to many expectant mothers to treat morning sickness. Alvin shares his story of overcoming obvious physical challenges, learning to use his feet to perform many of the tasks we would naturally use our hands for. Among many amazing skills and talents, Alvin is an accomplished musician, plays a number of instruments, including the piano and drums. He has appeared on over 100 telethons and since 1976 has been directly involved in raising over $225 million for charity. Alvin is a certified speaking professional and best-selling author of Alvin's Laws of Life, 5 Steps to Successfully Overcome Anything. So, Alvin, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to actually get to meet you and to be able to actually have a conversation about your story and about how resilience has played a role in your lifetime. I know that there's going to be a little introduction on what you have come through about the role that thalidomide has played, but I'm going to let you tell the story because I have a feeling you tell it best.
You know, I always say at the beginning, and you didn't, your audience would not have heard this because you put the record button on. I asked a pretty important question, and that is it audio or video? Because when it's video, there's a stark picture that people see. Although ironically, with the new Zoom generation, unless I'm standing, you can't really tell. But I have no arms. I'm also 60 years old. And a lot of people put those two together, because they may remember that in the early 60s, the name thalidomide became synonymous with a morning sickness medication that caused limb deficiencies. It was, no question, a horrible thing. It was also something that when I talk about it, and of course I'm going to sound pretty idealistic today, so
sure.
Put your seatbelts on, because that's who I am. So when I talk about thalidomide, I don't want to at all suggest it was a good thing. But for me personally, it changed my life in so many ways I can't even begin to describe. And that's why this is such a fascinating story to tell. Even though it's my story, that's not an ego statement, because this is really like a almost made for television show. Because not only was I born without arms because of thalidomide, but when I was 5 days old, I also became homeless. That's real. This is not melodrama. And my birth family were not homeless people. They were not, they didn't orphan me. They didn't pass away. They simply made a choice. And I think this is something too, that because there's a spiritual component in your life, or if I may even say religious, I don't want to insult anybody's sensibilities that way.
Sure.
But in fact, if I don't tell the truth, I'm not being honest. And honest, my birth family were very, very fundamentalist in their religion. They lived on a farm with my birth father's mother, who was one of those people that you would consider extreme. And they literally saw my birth as a curse.
Wow.
Yeah, except what a great thing. Why would I want to grow up in a home where not the religion, but that kind of extreme point of view was not open-minded to looking at somebody like me and seeing the human?
Very true.
And that is the beginning of my life. And that, I think, was also, and there's a reason I'm mentioning that too, is that was kind of the stigma of all of the thalidomide babies. When people would see their pictures, they didn't see a baby. They saw a freak, because that's what we called them back then. So as a consequence, the families were really struggling too. The mothers struggled tremendously because there was such little knowledge about drugs in those days. This was one of the first pharmaceuticals. And, they blamed themselves.
I bet.
So I realized that was really the catastrophic event. Yeah, it was bad to see all these babies born with, and it could have been just a finger, frankly, all the way up to missing all 4 limbs. But the bonus for me in this case was I did get a home. And that's where the real story takes off, because that's where I learned to be the Alvin Law that I am today. And that's where I learned so many of the foot skills that I used using my feet. And again, your audience won't be able to see that, but that's also something that catches people's attention, is they'll notice, oh, hey, that guy's using his feet. That looks weird. So I have been stared at for 60 years. And you know what? At some point, I don't know when it was exactly, I kind of just gave up on worrying about what people thought, but not in an arrogant way. You know, this is just me. If you're uncomfortable with my feet, that's too bad. But that's the story. And that's why there's so many different angles, especially when you talk about resilience, because, hey, man, I guess I know how it works.
Yes. Well, and just for those listening in, a few minutes ago, Alvin, lifted his coffee cup and took a sip of his coffee with his feet, right? And that's the stuff you can't see over the podcast, but I would encourage you to look up Alvin on the internet, and we'll be putting some links in to learn more about Alvin and his public speaking as well. So great point, Alvin, in that your adoptive parents really ended up giving you quite a gift. And I love this part of the story, and I've watched some of your videos on your website as well. Can you tell us more about what your adoptive parents then gave you?
Well, I'm going to start off by sounding a bit clinical.
Okay.
Hilda Law was her name. Jack Law was her husband. To me, this is actually a really critical part of the story. Mom was 55 years old when she met me. That's
amazing.
Important because she had wisdom.
Yes.
But she was also my dad and her had been through a time frame in history that was challenging for sure. They married in 1930, right at the beginning of the Depression. That was real. They lived in rural Saskatchewan in a little town called Kenora. They had 2 sons that were born in 1932 and 1936. And then Dad went to World War II in 1940, and he was gone for 4 years. Yeah. My brothers often talk about, my oldest brother's 88 now, but he was only 8 years old when my dad left, and he had to look after a 4-year-old little brother. Wow. My mom was not wealthy, so they struggled. And then Dad came home, and he didn't have PTSD as bad as some troopers or, frontline soldiers would get, but he did have a difference when he came home. He was very solemn and very calm and quiet and reserved. And Mom said that was tough because he wasn't the same man that when he came back. But he worked hard and he dove into his job. Because of that, he was an 18-hour-a-day worker. He was a mechanic. He eventually got a job being a service manager for an international harvester dealership 30 miles down the road in Yorkton. So now Mom not only was living in an empty home because my brothers had been raised and grown up,
yes,
but was a woman of faith. And she saw stories of children that needed temporary homes. A lot of them, quite bluntly, were Indigenous children who were suffering on their own reserves with fetal alcohol syndrome and different sorts of challenges. That's not judging, by the way. Mm-hmm. And they simply needed to have a place to be a pit stop, it was called. Mm-hmm. And Mom and Dad were not judgmental. They didn't try to change their ways. They acknowledged who they were. And then when I had nowhere to go, they were simply not hired, but that'd be a great way to think of it, to take care of me. And when they took me in, it was the same thing. But this was a little different than a First Nations child with all of their parts. And this was 1960. So I like to joke, my mom couldn't exactly Google no arms, right?
Sure. There wasn't as many resources available.
Right. But this is where, to use a really old expression, I'm an old guy, the rubber hits the road. They were determined to not treat me like I was, in those days, the word was crippled. They just didn't see it. They saw a spirit in me at a very early age. Using my feet came natural. But here was the key. This was small town Saskatchewan. So when we hear it takes a village to raise a child, that would be the definition. Because my parents were older, their friends were older, and their friends were now into grandchildren. So I was like a grandchild. So I was in this place of total acceptance. I mean, not total, that would be maybe too strong a word, but I was embraced. rather than rejected. I couldn't have landed in a better place to make my life what it was going to be.
What I hear in that is also a sense of community, that Hilda would have also had further supports to help her as well, that you had all these people that were embracing and also willing to step up and help.
Well, I became a bit of a character too, right? You know how kids can be when they get precocious, 3, 4 years old, because they're getting all the attention. I got all the attention. I was literally a single child in a single family home. I didn't have brothers to live with. They were living in Ontario. So yes, I got all the attention. But I think the key to this, there's another one, there was like a double life. I don't remember this as to when it started. Mom would always tell me it started from the time that I was an infant. But because I was a foster child, and when you say adopted, to be technical myself, I was never adopted.
Oh, okay.
But they were given legal guardianship and changed my name.
Okay.
Now, why that's important is because adoption would be a totally different thing. And it was the way they got around the rule that my parents were actually technically in 1960 too old to adopt a child.
Oh, I see. Okay. I apologize. That's good to clarify.
No, don't apologize, because that is a great functional word, because my parents really did in many ways become my adoptive family. But in the vernacular that we talk about with foster homes and those sorts of things, I definitely called them my forever family. I didn't use those words, but that was the way that it worked. And really, to be quite blunt about this, that's where a lot of the other thalidomide babies struggled. They didn't have the exposure to community. Many of them were hidden in their homes. A significant portion of them, there was about 125 in Canada, never even went to school. There was such a negative attachment. In fact, a lot of the mothers really struggled with mental health. So as I like to say, with great sensitivity,
yes,
my mother had no reason to be guilty. And therefore, she could push me in ways that seemed illogical. So when it came to something like a cookie would be on the table, rather than hold the cookie in front of my face so I could eat it, she would put the cookie just far enough away that I had to figure out how to get at it to eat it with my feet. This was a regular thing. People used to think she was horrible because I was learning to walk. I didn't walk till I was 2, by being on the front lawn and falling on my face.
Wow.
People would be there, walking their kids or driving by, and they'd go, look at that horrible woman letting that poor crippled child fall on his face. Well, frankly, I don't remember ever getting hurt. I never broke any parts, but I sure as heck learned how to get up.
Yeah.
And that was really the epitome of tough love. So yes, I mean, this is almost a perfect story, except it's not perfect. It's just real.
Yes.
This is how significant we can be with our own children if we choose that mod.
I'm glad you raised that, because it is something I often talk with parents about, because of course we all worry about our kids, and it's heartbreaking to see them go through challenges and adversities. And, that stood out for me as part of your story with Hilda, that she was willing to be that tough love mom for you, knowing that it's going to give you those life skills. And I'm curious how that maybe you have a son as well, right? And how did that impact your parenting as a father also?
Well, that's a great question, because he's 35 and he's not quite like anybody else. But my son learned tough love too. My son, however, that's a really interesting question. I don't always talk about Vance, and Vance is his name, because it's a bit of an uncomfortable topic, not for me to talk about, but to talk about out loud. I don't do it on stage because it doesn't fit any of my materials that I'm trying to do when I'm speaking about leadership. But I think it's a good thing to bring up. His mother and I were not in a long relationship when she became pregnant.
Okay.
I think we'd maybe known each other for a couple of months. So it wasn't even like this was meant to be a long-term thing. It was a oops.
I see.
But we married because of our faith.
Yes.
That's not to sound negative, but it was a terrible marriage. But here's what really happened for real. She suffered from a lot of mental health problems because her imbalance in her body as a pregnant woman went out of whack. And then she suffered from severe postpartum depression. She didn't even want to hold the baby. So I actually became the primary caregiver.
Okay.
You can believe that, without arms, holding and caring for a brand new baby. and she would go and leave for hours because she was depressed.
I see.
And that led to a divorce, but that also led to him coming to live with me. So he was actually given custody with her, but the reality was he spent 95% of the time with me. So eventually I got full custody of my son when he was 7. I met my wife, Darlene, now when he was 5. Can you imagine a woman meeting me, divorced herself, but knowing that she's getting together with a guy without arms, with a speaking business where he has no idea what he's doing to run the business, and has a child? What a package.
She sounds awesome.
She is awesome. She would be with respect, the polar opposite of my ex-wife. But my point of this is Vance still struggles with mental health.
Okay.
To this day. Even having a father as a motivational speaker and leadership expert, he still struggles. And there's an irony. Right now, he's in heaven because he's not a sociable person.
Yes.
So he's working, but he loves the isolation because my son, let's be honest, things about counseling that I would never understand. But I think that's why we need to be honest. Resilience isn't just about, just have a good attitude or, just get over it. Some people really have serious struggles. And I count myself very lucky that I never had any mental health struggles myself. A little bit of depression, but I think it's because I had such a solid foundation. And with, again, respect to my ex, my son did not have that same kind of childhood upbringing that I would have loved he'd had.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, and can I ask whether you think you were just born with this perspective on the world? Was it something you had to work at and develop?
So that's a great question. And I actually know the answer. I got to meet my birth family in 1993.
Okay.
And that's when I started saying that leaders are grown, not born. It's one of my speaking lines. And I believe that attitude is grown, not born. I believe that what we are born into as a family is a significant part of that, no question about it.
Sure.
But I also know so many stories, as you do, of people that have risen above their upbringing. Maybe they grew up in a bad home, or maybe they grew up in a struggling relationship, but they still managed to make it on their own. That's why we have so many products like your show, where we can encourage those that are struggling with their own identity to realize that everybody goes through something.
Yes.
And how we decide to come out the other end is really our choice. And I think at the end of the day, this attitude thing has become a little bit of a cynical thing. Just have a good attitude. Well, okay, I'm going to throw a formula at you. And I love this. This comes from Jack Canfield's book, Success Principles.
Okay.
I didn't realize that I've been practicing this my whole life, because it was the way we were taught in my home. And I say we because my brothers are very resilient people too. ERO. Those are the letters, ERO.
Okay.
E stands for event, R stands for reaction, O stands for outcome. So I add a plus or minus in front of the R, because everybody has an event. We're having an event with COVID. Whether you have a positive or negative reaction is going to affect the outcome in your own life. It won't affect the world outcome of COVID, but it affects your own personal take on what you're feeling. And this is where mental health is huge, because as I said, my son's happy with isolation. I'm not. I'm a happy, unisolated person. I'm a speaker. I love being with people.
Yes.
But I know that if I react negatively, my negative energy will take over my day. And then I become upset too easily. And then I become snappy. But more than anything, I start to get a little bit of an edge where I'm forgetting how blessed I am, because I am. And I think that, to make a big segue here, if you don't mind.
You just go for it.
I believe what I got out of all of this growing up in that home was gratitude, right? We were a religious family, so we are blessed. Yes, we are. You can use your feet. That's a blessing, not a curse. You can go to school. That's a blessing, not a curse. You can do all these things that may seem impossible to people. Why is that? Well, some say that God did this. I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he or she didn't. I don't know. All I know is that our home had this feel to it. And that's why I say I was so lucky.
Well, it makes me think about the how family and community can help with the sense of resilience. And it may not be our born family, the family that we originate from. It may be others that come into our lives, like your foster family, that really embraced you and saw you as a human being first. And I just like to remind people that sometimes your quote unquote family is the people that you choose to bring around you.
Well, you don't get to pick who you're born with, right?
Right.
I mean, I've got so many great lines that I use, to be honest. These lines are meant for my work, right? So when I say you don't get to pick your life, but you do get to pick the way you live it, is true. In fact, I want to say something that's going to sound a little bit, and it's not mean-spirited, that's the wrong expression, but it's going to be real blunt. Too many people stay in a negative relationship because they don't have the confidence to go find another one. And a lot of women do that. And a lot of men are really bad. And I think what I also learned growing up in my home was my dad was a model for how to treat my mom. So that's why when I was with my ex, it didn't fit the model. There was violence, there was fighting, there was anger. When I met Darlene, she's probably the happiest human being I've ever seen in my entire life. You think I'm positive? My God, it oozes out of her. I used to call her Polly, like Pollyanna when she was growing up. And I think that's another thing, is that even that happy home model did not repair my son's internal damage.
Right.
So I think what my son has really done very well is he's been very cautious about who he hangs out with. That's a one blessing he's definitely had, is he's not gotten with a bad crowd. He's never gotten into drugs. He's never gotten into alcohol in a big way. He likes a beer or a Caesar once in a while, but he's a good person. And I think that's the bottom line. He's still single, and I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Because a lot of people my age are going, are you having grandchildren? Oh, God, no, please, no, please, no, get a cat. So he got a cat.
Perfect. Yeah. So what would you certainly have lots of positive messages, Alvin. And I guess what I'd like to know a little bit about, because I know you play a lot of instruments, and tell me about the role that music has played in your life and what that has brought you.
So first of all, I want the audience to picture this again as they're listening, that I have no arms. So when I saw a piano for the first time, I didn't think, well, I can't play a piano. I've got no arms. I used my feet. Like any kid would play around with a piano. So at 10 years old, my friends were getting piano lessons. So I went to my mom, I want piano lesson. And it was like, honey, we'll try. And we went to a great piano teacher. She wasn't a terrible lady, but she refused to teach me because she didn't see the point. She had too many students already. Why would she waste her time with a kid using his feet? And it wasn't really disrespectful. It was just honest. So then I started thinking, well, I'll never play piano. I'll never play music. The dominoes begin.
Right.
But my mom gets a phone call a year later, almost to the day that I found out I couldn't play piano, from a band director in Yorkton who had, been phoning my mom and all the moms in town to tell them about, this program they put into place where you took a music aptitude test. And if you got a good score, you could be in the band. So he's calling my mom to say, would Alvin like to be in the band? He got 96% on this test. Mom didn't even know about the test. And of course, tells this guy, sure, he'd love to be in the band, but by the way, he's got no arms. And this guy just predictably said, well, we can't have a kid in the band with no arms, because that's a typical response.
Sure.
Except Mr. McClary, this man, was not a typical human being. He called back because he somehow, with a couple of teachers at the Yorkton High School, the regional high school, mounted a trombone on the side of a wooden chair with homemade, in fact, they did it in the metal shop at school, metal rods, clamps, and a trombone that fit in these two clamps that held it. And I played it, if the audience could see this, with my right foot and the slide.
Yes.
So I got into band. They became my people. We just talked about this. I was around musicians. Now, musicians can be kind of moody. There's no question about it. But when you get around creative people like that, this is another line that I made up, they don't care what you look like.
Yes.
Can you play? So it became an equalizer, where if I could learn to play the trombone as good with my foot as they did with their hands, then I would be judged by my music, not by my disability. And because I got into jazz, I went to jazz camp, and jazz camp revealed another talent I had. I didn't know I had it, playing the drums. So I learned to play the drums because it was fun. Yeah. And mom and dad managed to scrounge enough money to buy me an old used set of drums. So I played those too. And then, just as if to say to the lady who said I'd never played piano, when I went to college in 1978, I found a piano one day, sat down on a beautiful Sunday afternoon looking out at the mountains from the 4th floor of Mount Royal College, now university, and wrote my first song on the piano. So wow. I played the piano too. And by the way, the name of the song is called The Ode to the Old Bag Who Said My Toes Were Too Short. Music changed my life, because not only did it put me with an incredible bunch of people, but it was almost like, oh my God, look at the gift I've been given. But the gift wasn't me and music. The gift was Blaine McClary. You know, look at the gifts I've been given in my life. How lucky am I?
Well, and often it is somebody who just is willing to think outside the box, that really sees you and your potential and willing to come in and make something really creative that could allow that to happen. And I love that. That's how innovation happens. That's how possibilities are made.
You know, and to be quite personal about this, not egotistical, my legacy still lives in the Yorkton music program, because successive band directors after that carried on the story. You know, that's almost a mythology. Like when they would have a band and maybe a trombone player would be struggling, the band director could say, hey, that Alvin Law had no arms. What's your excuse? And it really is part of the mythology of my high school. And isn't that cool?
Yes.
I mean, that's what actually a lot of the companies that I work with as a speaker will also utilize that image to say, you know, what would Alvin do? And I think that's why I'm very proud of what I do. But it's not about, you know, I'm not narcissistic. I think my mom would say it best. There was no accident in this plan. And Mom used God. I'll just tell you.
Sure.
Mom used God. Said, God made this happen. God brought me to you, not me to him or to her, brought her to me. God brought me to go to school across the street where disabled children didn't go to public school in the 60s. God brought me Blaine McClary. But more than anything, I had that spirit. But it wasn't sort of an arrogant spirit, if I can be that way. Sure. It was like a very, very opposite of that. I was humble because I felt humility. You know, everything my dad was about was humble. Just be humble. Don't brag. In fact, they didn't like that I became a speaker.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, they went, that's private. You can't tell people that story. I go, I'm not going to keep this private. It's a great story. I even look, I can't show you, but I've got a book too, right? So that is something. My mom was almost embarrassed about the idea that I was writing a book. She passed away before it was published.
Oh.
But the fact of the matter is they were that humble themselves. Yes. Mom used to say, just doing what I had to do. Really, Mom? I don't think most people would do what you did. So there you go.
Yeah, very well said. And I think about how resilience is created, right? And like you have just identified, sometimes it really comes down to, how am I looking at this? How am I limiting myself? And I do believe we all have our gifts. We do have that special something inside of us that allows us to get through that next hard thing. And for you, that positive attitude that somewhat you chose, somewhat was influenced certainly in your family that you were raised in. But I can hear the impact that's had in terms of thinking around obstacles, not just seeing it as something to stop at. But how am I going to get around this? And with some help of influential people, you learned that along the way and had those experiences.
Well, and if I may, I'm going to brag now for sure. Okay. I was the first ever most distinguished alumni from Mount Royal College in 1982. I was 21 years old when I accepted the award on the stage at the Jubilee Auditorium here in Calgary. I was actually sitting right next to the famous Grant McEwen, who founded Grant McEwen, now University in Edmonton, right?
Lovely.
And it was so funny because I'm next to this ancient guy and we're chatting about stuff. And his comment, and that's why I bring it up, he said, I was joking because I said, I think I'm too young for this. And he says, age has nothing to do with it. You're the perfect example of what this college is supposed to represent. And when they handed out this award and they made the proclamation, and this is my point, definitely bragging, but I think there's a really good point to be made. They felt that I was the epitome of what a post-secondary institution is all about. To take people from every different walk of life, every different color of skin or background or language or whatever it is that differentiates them, and take them to the next level where they can turn around and go and use what Mount Royal gave them to benefit society. This is how they saw my role. So as a distinguished alumni, and I look at the list of who those people were, a lot of them are famous. So how do people get famous? Because they do big things, because they learn in college, or it doesn't have to be even college. They learn that big things aren't easy. That's why resiliency is kind of an ironic thing. If I may boldly say this again about your way working with parents. See, that's a pet peeve of mine. Not the phrase helicopter parents or none of this. But parents came along and said, I don't want my child to suffer because I don't want my child to suffer. Okay, I get it. I've got a child. I didn't like him suffering either. But resilience doesn't come from a smooth highway. Resilience comes from bumps in the road, from obstacles that you have to overcome. And the kids need to figure out their own way through. That's how they learn resilience. You know, we've got these colleges now that have these places, safe spaces. I understand that because we want our people to feel like they can be safe. But when we create a barrier to freedom of thinking and freedom of speech and freedom of thought, then we don't allow children to develop the kind of square box they need to actually be in for a while so they can jump out of that box and go make the world a better place. That was kind of poetic, but the reality is, I like to think of it that way. When we put people in a box, we don't allow them to be themselves.
Well, and if as adults, if we look back on our lives, it is often through the most challenging times that we grew the most, whether it was something somewhat benign and difficult, like an exam that we were nervous about. Maybe it was the loss of somebody really close to us. We learn a lot about ourselves as we work through and walk through those challenges. So if we are protecting our kids from having anything that might be difficult, we're really denying them that opportunity to grow and to learn about themselves.
At 18 years old, pardon the interruption, I left Yorkton, Saskatchewan. 800 miles away was Calgary, and I couldn't even go to the bathroom without help.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do the bathroom, but I couldn't do the clothing. I mean, now today I can. I've got all my clothing is adapted with elastic waistbands.
Okay.
All my clothing, even my fancy, I just looked, why did I look at my closet? All my clothing, like even my suits, my tuxedo, everything has been fixed by a tailor because I have an ability to use like a yoga maneuver to be able to take care of myself and dress myself. And of course, a lot of people think Darlene takes care of me. Oh, she takes care of me spiritually, but she doesn't have to take care of me physically. But at 18 years old, I move 800 miles away or 1,200 kilometers, and I have to ask strangers to help me with my pants. Yeah. That doesn't come from having a smooth ride. That comes from overcoming a ton of stuff. And I think that's why I felt nothing but confidence. I wasn't scared. I stepped out. And in fact, that's the next big thing that happened to me by going to college. Not only did I get an education, but I surrounded myself with really good people. Perfect. You got to have a good friend who will be willing to go into the men's washroom with you, take you in there and undo your pants and that kind of stuff. That takes a strength of character that is hard to define. So I've constantly in my life been surrounded by the best of character. And that's huge.
Well, and let me just pull that thread out for a second, because I think about, and when I emailed you, I know I talked a little bit about radical interdependence, and that's my new favorite phrase lately. And so on one hand, you've certainly learned to be very independent given the physical limitations, but you've come around that. But at the same time, you've also learned how to also let other people in and let them help you when there's a need. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And if I may interject with a great segue, that's why when we talk about mental health, we need to be strong to know that it isn't weakness to ask for help.
Yes.
It's strength. Nobody does this alone. Actually, that could be the core problem and also the core solution to COVID. Now, I don't know about you, but when we first locked down, everybody was a little upset. But then I noticed everybody was kind of being really nice. Mm-hmm. I never saw one person in the early stages, and I'm talking months, where there was a conflict. You know, I was like everyone else. I wanted to go get something. Let's just say I was at Best Buy. So there's all these people lined up 6 feet apart, wearing masks. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. You know, and then people would hold doors for you. And then people would, you know, help old people up a stairway or help carry their groceries. All this benevolence began to surface. Yeah. But then, to be very specific, this is kind of uncomfortable, then George Floyd was murdered. And it totally took that feeling off track because all of a sudden we were fighting again. The American election was a perfect example of fighting. I call them the divided states of America. That's the worst possible scenario when you start to divide and then not even want to be around people that don't think like you. That's scary. We developed, I love the interdependence idea, because I think that's another thing. If you were to meet a room full of my friends, they would all have one thing in common, and that would be their spirit. But no two of them were alike or are alike. And what I mean by that is I've got friends that are bikers. I've got friends that are nuclear physicists. I've got rock star friends. I know people that are janitors. I know homeless people. I know every walk of life, because that's where my journey has taken me. Yeah. And it takes everybody to make a home.
Beautifully said, Alvin. Beautiful. Can I check with you to see, as we get ready to wrap up here shortly, what would you really, I mean, you're sharing lots of messages through this whole interview, but if you were to share a couple key things that you really want people to know around resilience, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would really like to share?
Well, I would simply add that we are all feeling insecure now. But we cannot crawl into a cave and put the rock in front of it and hide from the world. We need to figure out a way to get together, whether it's with these Zoom things that people are getting zoomed out, I get it. But maybe part of this, and I think this is I figured this out for myself. I'm 60, so I didn't grow up in the fast food generation. One of my favorite lines that I've created through this saga has been this one. We may live in a fast food world, but we can't live a fast food life. So we need to just chill. You know, if that sounds weird, I guess, but just chill, relax. You know what? If as long as you're warm and you have food in your stomach, but then you also need to remember too, there's people that don't. So if you need an outlet to make you feel like you're helping the world recover, even though we're in the lockdowns now again, remember there's always people that need you. Homeless shelters, pet shelters, churches, feeding programs, all these things that make human beings what they're supposed to be. See, we made one mistake in our huge development as human beings over time, and that is we started teaching it's all about me. But that's not right, because it doesn't have the right harmony, right? It doesn't have the right feel. You know, why do we feel so good when we help somebody? Yeah. Why do we feel so good when we make a donation? Why do we feel so good when we see a happy story? God, there was something on the internet the other day. A guy rescued a puppy out of an alligator's mouth. Did you see that on the internet?
I didn't see that one.
Total stranger sees this puppy get taken by an alligator, and he goes and jumps in the water and pulls this alligator out, and this puppy is in his teeth. And he pries the jaws apart and throws the puppy back on the shore. He didn't even know this dog.
Yes.
That's the kind of act. I'm not saying everybody go out there and wrestle an alligator.
Sure.
I'm saying when we're selfless, we become what human beings were meant to be.
Well, beautiful. And that's what I hope this Resilience Project will be about, is just not only hearing the stories, but being able to share ways in which we can grow our own resilience, but that of others also, by giving back to community, finding some way to make a difference. And I appreciate that theme, Alvin.
Thank you.
Can you tell me, I don't want to miss the fact that we haven't talked about your book. Tell me about your book.
So I wrote a book called Alvin's Laws of Life. This is actually a great way to end the interview, frankly. And how I came up with Alvin's Laws of Life, there's a slight irony because I know where you live. My wife and I were on a ferry to go to Victoria to speak at the Empress for a very significant corporate client who had hired me 6 months earlier to do the same job. Most of my work, 99.5% of it as a speaker, is always to new groups. This was freaking me out because I didn't ever get a repeat customer so quick.
Oh.
So they'd already heard the story of thalidomide. They'd already heard the story of Hilda Law. They'd already heard the story of Blaine McClary. What was I going to tell them? So Darlene said, Alvin, you got tons of stories, but why don't you give them your own Stephen Covey list of habits?
Beautiful.
Right? Stephen Covey's list of habits, 7 habits of highly effective people. So I called my habits Alvin's Laws of Life. And I wrote a single sheet with 5 words: attitude, learn, value, imagination, and never give up. That's kind of cheating. But they spell my name, Alvin.
Oh, right on.
And then I wrote a segment from there, that's how I formed my book. So in a sense, what I'm doing with the book and the idea of the laws is encouraging people to have their own. so they can write their own personal mission statement. There's a reason why these motivational posters are so popular. But I would suggest we need reminder affirmations. I know an affirmation is exactly that, but I call them both, because affirmations aren't just words we say to chant. They're a reminder that we need to focus on the good things we have in our life. Anybody can look at the bad.
Yes.
That's easy. And there is bad. There's lots of bad.
Yeah.
But I can't look at it that way. And I'm not avoiding it. I'm not in denial. So my laws are really just my own personal mission statement. And I often tell people, write your own. Write a word that you love, something that you can, connect with. But you got to write it down and put it up. So it's something that you see every day. I got a plaque given to me in 1981 by a lady in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. She gave it to me as a gift because I'm kind of well known in Saskatchewan from doing telethons. I'm a little known in BC for that too.
Yes, you are.
She put it on a gift. It was like a gift card size. And she laminated it on a piece of wood. And I've carried that plaque around with me my entire life. And it's in my bathroom. Sorry to be graphic.
It's okay.
And it's on the wall right at eye level. And every morning when I come in to take care of business, I sit down to pee because, gentlemen, I have lousy aim without hands. I sit down to pee and I look at that plaque and it says, I'm not afraid of tomorrow, for I have seen yesterday and I love today.
I love it.
That's how I start my day, every day. I also do not use my device like most people, which is another sideline of bit of advice too. We get too much negative kind of feel by looking at our devices. You know, we see something that gets us riled up. We hear a story that makes us anxious. We watch stories of people that are doing bad things and we think the world's a terrible place. No, the world is actually a beautiful place. It's really all in how we see it.
Well done. Well, thank you for that reminder. I love the positive affirmation and to make it personal to each of us. And I'm glad we got to mention the book. And I'm sure it's probably on your website. So we'll make sure we include a link to that
you bet.
Attached to this podcast. And so thank you, Alvin, for being here to meet with us and to share your message. And what comes to mind as we wrap up is just no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, it doesn't have to be compared to what Alvin has come through, because we all have our own challenges and it's all relative. But what it is about looking at that other lens and to shift our perspective even slightly can give us a different experience. So thank you, Alvin, for that reminder.
It's been my pleasure. And you know what? You are the vessel that I want to applaud, and I do with every podcast I do. I've got a great story, but you're the one that is allowing it to be told to the world. And I want to thank you for that. Aww. Because we need more vibrational energy that feels good right now, more than ever before. And we need to balance that negative feel that's out there that is real. You're right. There is reality, but being positive about the world is not denying reality. It's just enhancing it.
Beautiful. Well, it's a privilege for sure. Thank you, Alvin. Alvin uses his incredible true story to challenge us on a personal level. If you are spending a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, what are you missing today that may contribute to a new narrative? As in Alvin's case, he is grateful for all of his challenges and experiences, as they have helped him become the person he is today. Without these obstacles, he would not have learned what he is capable of. As we approach the Christmas season, it's natural to reflect on the past year while also considering what the new year might bring. As in each day, we have a chance to write that story. Despite the circumstances or the obstacles you might be experiencing right now, what mindset do you want to create for yourself? And how might this inform the next chapter you are about to embark on? Thank you for listening to this episode of A Resilience Project. We would not be doing this podcast without you. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story or is helping to build resilience in their community, please email me at cindy@aresilienceproject.com. In fact, email me either way. I would love to hear from you. Also, check out my website, aresilienceproject.com, to meet the amazing people who have joined me on these podcasts. Last but not least, a big thank you to Doris Media House for their editing support. As you go about your week, I invite you to think about one way you can continue to grow your resilience muscle. What is one thing you can start doing today? See you next week.
Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca